Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the sixth and final webinar this afternoon in our series of Getting Started with Self-Sovereign Identity. Today, we are going to be having a nice conversation actually with two of my colleagues, Mikko, who's one of our lead developers, and Rob, who is one of our business analysts. And we're going to be talking about some of the user cases and some of the kind of topical points that we have regarding self-sovereign identity that we're seeing in the media just now, and also really drilling down into how this can impact businesses going forward and what are the tangible benefits and outcomes that can be implemented now. We have, as I say, this is part of a series. So for those that have not managed to attend some of the other webinars, you can find links to these both on the Condatis website, but also on the Condatis YouTube channel. And I really recommend having a look at those. There's a real mixture on there between some more information on user journeys, also a deep dive into the technical side of things and architecture. So please feel free to either subscribe to the YouTube channel or, like I say, go to our website and find out some more information. It's 1 minute past 3, so if you guys are ready, then I suggest we get started. There is a Q&A box, so we'll try and answer questions as they come in, or we'll take some at the end. So please feel free to drop in any questions, and like I say, I will come to them at the end. One thing I didn't mention is my name is Gillian. I'm one of the business development leads over here at Condatis, and I'm going to be hosting this little chat today. So let's get started if you're ready. Okie dokie. So one of the things I wanted to kind of just start us off with is just to give us some really kind of clear examples of, from your opinion, what would you suggest are some of the 3 main benefits that you would see for a user or as a company in implementing self-sovereign identity? And we'll put that over to Mikko to start with.
Sure. Thanks, Gillian, and welcome everyone. Hope you have a good afternoon. Starting with the first, I think the key benefit from self-sovereign identity, which is kind of in the name, it's the ownership of the data. So user will have complete ownership and visibility over the data, and they will hold the data themselves instead of that being held into the different corporations and different national entities in their data silos. So the user knows everything about where the parts of their identity are being used, when they're being used, and what parts of it are shared, and with which parties they're being shared with. So that complete ownership is, I think, the most important one. And related to that is that visibility. So when you as a user share your information, it's really obvious for you that this is the information you're sharing, and this is the party that you're sharing it with. So unlike some other solutions where companies can exchange data between themselves, they're here with decentralized identity. User is really in the center, and they know all the time what's happening. And the third one is that it really allows implementing new opportunities, new solutions that weren't really possible or feasible with decentralized approaches. And with your identity in your wallet, which might be, for example, in your smartphone, you can bring that identity over borders of companies or even national borders and use that same identity in different places. So you don't need to kind of create that relationship with all the parties that you deal with, but you can bring your own identity wherever you go with you. So I think that's the 3 key parts.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting what we see going forward, particularly like you say on kind of cross borders, crossing national borders, and seeing if this is something that will be implemented. We're going to talk about some of that in a little bit more detail next. Rob, what would you say, kind of from your side of things? What would you say are your 3 main benefits?
Thanks, Gillian. And yeah, and thanks, Mikko. That was really good. I think not too dissimilar from what Mikko was saying. I think really from an end user perspective, it's that sort of control and freedom that you get with having decentralized. It also gives you this autonomy away from organizations. And then ultimately, it's there to protect your identity. So I think from that freedom perspective, it's, if you look at the status quo and how your data is used currently, I think standard journey is to, you visit a new website, you have to create a site, you sign up to the T's and C's, you accept all the cookies. You don't really read any of these things. You don't really know how these organizations are going to use your data. And there's been attempts, with GDPR and stuff that have been brought in that do safeguard your data and how that is used to an extent. But I think what decentralized does is it takes that data ownership and gives it back to the actual individual. So as opposed to them being able to use my information, give them it once and they can do whatever with, the way decentralized works is that I'm actually in control and I have that ability to share when I want and with who I want, and then there's always the ability to revoke that as well. So it's really bringing that power back, to the users. And I think what's really interesting is that the internet, from an identity perspective, has been the same pretty much for the last 25 years. So this is really coming in and it is changing a lot of things. I think on the technology side of things, that's a big reason why it's became more prevalent. It's built behind the blockchain stack. As Gillian was saying, we've done webinars on this before, so if you do want the actual technical detail, you can go and look there. But distributed ledger technology is becoming a lot more popular, especially in finance, and everyone knows about Bitcoin and the price of that and everything else. So yeah, I think knowing it's built on that and the fact that it's actually getting adoption, I think what's really interesting, I know Mikko's going to talk about this a little bit later, but this isn't some new concept. It's been around for a good few years. The past 5 years, there's a lot of people working on this, but with COVID, it's really accelerated the adoption, across countries and across industries as well. So I think we'll get into a little bit more about why exactly that is.
No, for sure. And I think it's really interesting you're saying about kind of the redressing the balance of power and putting the ownership and the kind of putting it back in the hands of the end user. You're right. Unfortunately, even though I work in this industry, I'm a lot more savvy than I once were. But yeah, you would just say accept cookies. You would allow this. You would permit that. GDPR for a long time for me was basically that onslaught of emails that you got from all of these different websites or companies that you had subscribed to, for me, all over the shop. And that's really what GDPR meant for me. But it's only now that you understand like some of the complexities and having the ability to kind of regain that control, regain that power, and actually having the authority over your own identity, I think is extremely important and will only grow in importance when we continuously hear about things like hacks and all the other stuff that we sadly hear about a lot in the media. So no, that is really, really helpful. And that was a very nice start. But I've been quite kind already, gents, to give you a nice or easy introduction to the webinar today. We're going to get a little bit more deep now. And what I would like to talk about is COVID passports. So in the media, obviously, we're seeing an awful lot of attention regarding vaccination certificates, vaccination credentials, being able to show that you've been vaccinated or that you have a negative COVID result to perhaps partake in events, go into bars, go into restaurants. I would really love to kind of discuss that in a bit more detail, understand where the technology is today, what it would allow bar operators, for example, to do, but then also see kind of how it can be used in an inclusive way and just really kind of maybe shed a little bit more light about the actual technology solution behind the headlines and how this could actually be implemented by as I say, restaurateurs, by people that would potentially be downstream of those governmental decisions. Rob, I'm going to throw it over to you to start.
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. Yeah, so obviously, as everyone knows, this is something that's really been talked about a lot recently. I think there was a lot of concern around, digital passports and COVID passports, and I think a lot of that is justified if you look at it from a centralized point of view. I think, the idea of people are being given passports that's got all this personal information on them stored somewhere in a database that multiple systems have to access. That's where there's a real problem with this. I think there are a lot more problems, from the digital poverty, the accessibility point of view, and a lot of that, the technology itself isn't going to solve, and there are ways around that. But I think really, like I look at this and I hear what ministers are saying and different governments are saying, and it sounds like the perfect opportunity for decentralized. You know, the idea of being able to issue passports to individuals, you know, through a decentralized system, where they'll then have access to that, whether it's in their digital wallet. We can talk a little bit more maybe on like the paper-based digital verifiable credentials that we do as well. But I think that's the real key thing here. I think where sort of decentralized and SSII work well is when you have someone that needs to, you know, move around a lot. They need to access a lot of different systems, potentially visit different locations, and keep their identity on them. So I think, you know, with this idea of having your negative test result or your vaccine, I think as individuals you need to be in control of that, you know. And I think again, with a centralized system that potentially, you know, numerous other systems can interact with, it gets a bit, it could get dangerous quite quickly. And if it's not done right, you know, you've seen with the track and trace app in England and everything else, there are examples of, you know, solutions being rushed and, you know, it just not working out and you know, wasting millions of pounds. So I think with decentralized solution, you've got, you know, the NHS or your GP could issue you with a credential if you're in the UK that says, yep, they've had a negative test, and that's tied to them. And then I can, you know, I can go up to a bar and that bar wants to check, you know, that I've actually had a negative test. They can then request that I share that specific attribute, you know, so all I need to share with that restaurant is that I've got a negative test. They don't need to know my name, they don't need to know my address, they don't need to know any of that. I can just share that if that's all they need to pass that check. So I think coming back to, you know, the centralized way of things, that's just where it gets really dangerous. And I think a lot of people are thinking about this COVID passport as, you know, built in how we would normally build everything else at the moment. Whereas, like, I think this is an opportunity to actually use decentralized, give everyone that ability to have their own passports and control them as they want. And then I think as well, looking beyond, this will work, you know, across the world. You know, other organizations can interact with this technology. They can set up their systems so they can build proof requests, which is asking for, you know, certain attributes or a credential. And I think as well, coming back to the technology side of things, that there is a lot of security around here. So I can't sit in my bedroom and code up my own, you know, my own vaccine passport. There are systems and checks and balances in place to ensure that, you know, I'm as a restaurant, I know to expect, you know, NHS issued credentials, for example. So yeah, there's a lot to it. I think it's really interesting. I think, you know, there's a lot more with the accessibility and the, you know, the whole digital poverty piece, which a lot of people, especially in tech, sort of take for granted. But I think, you know, if they were to build a centralized system that they were expecting everyone to use, I think there would be a real pushback, you know, because there would be very valid concerns about, you know, is my data safe? How do I know what it's actually being used for and everything else? So yeah, that's sort of a whirlwind of my thoughts on that topic.
And I think it's really valuable. One of the things that, you know, I think is really interesting, and again, maybe in my very simple mind, one of the things that I love about the whole decentralized identity kind of concept is you're asking a specific question and you're getting a specific answer. So it's not a case of, for example, you have to produce a negative test result. Like you're saying, there's no requirement to produce necessarily your name, address, all this other information that is of such value. You're asking that question of, are you safe to enter the bar? And the answer is therefore yes. So again, I think what's really important about that is it gives that level of comfort of you're sharing the information that you're comfortable, that you're happy and you're willing to share. The other thing that I think is really important is that, you know, if it were a centralized system, or if it was, say, something that the government was leading, how does that work? Is it something you subscribe to? Do you need to be an active member of? Like, what does that look like? And I think that there's so much ambiguity about that again, it can kind of be a bit off-putting, whereas decentralized would obviously give you the ability to participate in the manner in which you want to participate. The other point I love is around revocation. So if you turn around and say, actually, you know what, I don't want to do this, you can stop. You can at any time turn around and say, I'm not sharing that information. I do not want this information. I no longer want to have that credential, and you can kind of opt out on that basis. Mikko, I'm going to throw it over to you from a slightly more technical angle. So we mentioned digital poverty and accessibility, which is obviously of huge importance, and particularly when we're looking at global solutions and we're looking at, obviously, COVID is a global problem. When we were looking at, say, hybrid solutions, so when we could have a digital version or maybe paper credentials, maybe can you explain to me a little bit more about how that would actually work in principle? So how does paper come with digital? How does that all kind of filter down, as I say, both to operators, to businesses, and then also to the end user?
Definitely, yeah. So I think it's really important that we don't take this like verifiable credentials used for COVID passes as the silver bullet solution that will be used globally, because that's not going to happen. Specifically with the timeframes that we have, there are already vaccination programs ongoing all over the globe, and we need to be able to use the certificates we get out of those without requiring kind of, for example, reissuing everything as a credential in this digital solution. So we need to be able to be interoperable, not just across the borders and national borders and different solutions, but also between the different models, like the paper versions of the credentials that you might get in once you get a vaccine, or centralized digital solutions that some nationalities might have in place. So we need to build the decentralized solution as an additive to that. So we have the option to use all the different options when we issue the COVID passes, but also have an option as a verifier in the technical sense. But it would be, for example, a bar owner who needs to verify that anyone coming to the bar has been vaccinated, for example, if that's the case. So they might be only able to see a physical paper because they don't have any digital solutions. It's really like a simplified solution, but they can then move over to the decentralized solution to give them more trust. So, for example, in the compared to the paper solution, where you have the paper credential, building a digital solution, whether it's centralized or decentralized, will give you more trust to that certificate. So it's really cryptographically proven that it's been issued by this specific issuer, for example, NHS. But then coming from a centralized digital solution to the decentralized one, that gives then us the portability. So people can go to different companies, they can travel to other countries, and they can use the same credential without those different parties working in the background having to have like technical solutions that work with each other. They just need to have that trust element, that they trust each other, and then they can use the centralized cryptographic to verify that the digital passes they see are actually trustworthy.
Okay. So it's all about, I suppose, having that kind of trust framework and that trust network of being able to have credentials that you recognize from a specific issuing body, but then also being able to kind of verify them, to recognize them across multiple different channels. So even if that is checking it as a piece of paper as an individual or using some sort of other verification method. So I think I understand. Okay, so let's just take this right down to the kind of actual use case level. So Rob, we're going to pretend that I am a bar owner. And what does this mean for me? So I'm hearing about this, like, what do I actually need to do for people that want to come into my bar, that I want to make sure that everyone's safe, that everyone can participate and have a lovely time? What do I need to do in that situation?
Sure. Yeah. No. So I think it's a good example. I think this is where, the credentials do rely on, that ecosystem and having the issuing side and the verification side. So I think, let's say, the government has implemented a decentralized COVID passport that can track your vaccines, that can track your negative test results, etc. From that, then the bar would need some sort of verifier application, and within that application, you would create what's called a proof request, and that's essentially what information do you need to get from the user to pass this proof request. So in this case, it could be, do they have they had a vaccine? Do they have a negative test result? And for the purposes of a bar and track and trace, they might still want, your telephone number or your email address. So thinking back to, summer, August time last year, going into bars when they had their, their big eat out to help out thing in the UK where everyone could go out and get, cheap food. Standing there, I remember multiple times, there was still social distancing, but it was fairly crowded. And I'm giving this person who's working at the bar my phone number, my email address, and my home address verbally in the bar. And anyone could have been listening to that. They probably still got that information. And it also took about 5 minutes as well, to do that. But in the scenario where they've got this verification app, all it would generate a QR code. I, as a user, scan that QR code and it says, the red line wants to know your COVID vaccine status and your mobile number for track and trace purposes. And I can either accept or reject that. So I can reject it and walk away saying I don't want you to have that information, or I'm able to share that with them then. And then that just gives the restaurant confidence that they've actually gotten an actual verified sort of NHS passport, as opposed to one, like I said, that I've coded up in my bedroom. We can build it in a way that it means it's only going to allow credentials from certain organizations. So that will require some collaboration in terms of having this sort of trusted list of who can actually verify this specific type of credential. So I think that's where it would work from that perspective. And then you've just got that display of data to the person on the door that says, yes, they've had the test, yes, that's who they are. I've got a number that can then be saved into their central system in case they need to be contacted for track and trace. So that's how I think that would work today. Like I said, there is that reliance on you need the credential. It's the chicken and egg thing of you need the credential to exist first to be able to verify it. But I think if that's the way it went and there was this COVID passport, that's how you would do it as an organization. And then this could just be a web app that you could run on tablets or laptops or even just mobiles if that's what you had.
Okay, so let's take that even one step further. Obviously, at Condatis, we are very similar to a lot of other businesses. We're discussing about what it might look like coming back to the office in the fullness of time, what preparations we need to make. The government guidance obviously changes, but it's all subject to change because of the volatility of numbers and how the COVID the vaccine rollout, all of that stuff. It's kind of a real movable feast. So I suppose I'm asking this question from a Condatis point of view, but also for wider employers. What can we do now? How can we be ready, and what can we be putting in place to kind of make sure that when we do go back into offices, when we are allowed to eat inside, when we are allowed to go back to sports, football matches, rugby matches, whatever it may be, what are the kind of preparatory steps that we can put in place now that can be built upon as more and more information comes down from government as to the direction, the requirements, etc.? What can we start doing today? And I'll ask Mikko that first. From a kind of technology point of view, what would you suggest to get kind of business ready?
Sure. Yeah, so I think what's happening at the moment, what Rob mentioned, is the all about this governance layer and trust, building the trust frameworks, and that's happening at the moment. And there are like national and global and non-profit organizations and different initiatives working on that. That's something to be aware of as a company, that there are those discussions happening. Initiatives like COVID-19 credentials initiative, which is using verifiable credentials, and there are other organizations that are either technical or non-technical or a combination. So being aware of that and being prepared to understand what their discussions mean is at the moment one of the key things. But then preparing to what comes in the future is maybe in certain level you need to understand the technology. So if this comes in, if there are digitally verifiable credentials that you could verify as a business owner, then understand to a level how you could use those and what are the processes that you'd need to build those in within your company, and how would that happen, and what as a company I can allow based on different kind of results of that verification and different sort of passes that users might bring with them. And for that, there's also this element of you probably want to have partners or different parties that you can discuss this with. So you don't want to be alone having to understand everything once it's in, but different organizations or companies that you can communicate with to understand this, so that you can be prepared and you have something that you can start using without having to build that from the start once the information comes in.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Is all of this is not going to be kind of a fresh green approach. I certainly think that from Condatis' point of view, certainly the client conversations that I'm having currently, at no point are we saying to anyone, you have to rip up and start again. You've got to change all your technology that you have today. This is all about adding a layer by which you can verify, by which you can accommodate what may or may not be coming down the path, and making sure that you're business ready, but not disrupting your day-to-day processes just now. That's the last thing that we would recommend. I think it's really important to talk about partnerships. One of the things, again, coming into Condatis that I've learned so quickly is how many questions are actually identity related questions or identity related business problems that I would never previously have badged as identity, whether that be loyalty or whatever it may be. Actually, I think this is really going to accelerate kind of the understanding and the prioritization of identity within organizations where it might not have been understood to be in that kind of bracket previously. So you're right, having strong partners, whether it be Condatis or others, people that are in the existing network, in the existing ecosystem, I think is hugely important, because at the end of the day, it's our job to understand this and to guide and to try and help where we can. So I think that's a great point. Okay, we can breathe now a little bit. We've got through COVID passports. Obviously, we know that it's a bit of a controversial one, and let's take a moment, if we dare, to look beyond COVID. So some of the technologies that we're talking about will obviously kind of be in the first stages designed to respond to COVID. So it will be things like vaccination certifications. It will be verification of that. It might be, all COVID related things. In the post-COVID era, though, do we think that this is actually going to potentially be something that can be carried forward? And again, like, how can we make sure that we are putting in technology and we're putting in practices that help us now to, as I say, kind of accommodate what might be COVID related, but can also be changed and can be modified and enhanced in the future for a post-COVID world? Mikko, maybe you can talk to that a little bit to start with, if that's okay.
Yeah, certainly. So as Rob mentioned earlier, is that this technology is a really good fit for this situation we find ourselves in, but it's much older than that. It's the technology itself. It's not a COVID response. It's been in development for years, and there are companies that have been working with the technology for many years before any of this was. Before we faced any of these. So there is really that technological trust and standards being built on this that can be used much beyond COVID and are being used already. So even now, it's not just a COVID response, and there's potential to use that much beyond. And COVID definitely, as a kind of one of the ideal use cases for this, has accelerated its usage and adoption a lot, but there are a lot of potentials, like all the benefits we talked about for user, the portability, data ownership, and benefits for the companies with new solutions they can build with it. They are really applicable for more than just this, and they are going to bring new use cases in the future, and you could build a lot of new solutions based on that technology. But as Gillian mentioned, it's not like you would switch over your systems to decentralized overnight. So you need to have a way to kind of select what are the ideal use cases for your company, for example, that would most benefit of this, and then think about what's the quickest way to get those benefits. So as a key with the decentralized self-sovereign identity is the user, getting the user benefits of them owning the data, them being able to bring their data over to different companies and having that visibility over their data. You can have that without implementing your own solutions completely decentralized. So you can in a way bridge that identity that you currently have in the centralized system and have that kind of moved over to user-owned smartphone wallets or other forms of credentials that are verifiable. So you can use that technology without having that starting point of the centralized system and kind of slicing your most beneficial use cases out of that and bridging that over to the decentralized world, like bit by bit.
Yeah. And I think the word bridge is perfect because, as you say, it means that you can pull bits of information, you can pull certain kind of processes, whatever it may be, and you can, as you say, bridge them over into decentralized world, kind of as and when required, and do that at a pace that is comfortable. Okay, so Rob, maybe you can expand on this as well a little bit and just kind of explain a little bit more about some examples of how that could be applied. So what would that actually necessarily look like? So kind of extending the current tech stack rather than replacing, and just see how that could work potentially in practice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think as Mikko was saying, SSI isn't some silver bullet that's going to come in and solve all our problems, But I think what's interesting about COVID is, it's forced everyone to, look at the problems they have today and think about different approaches. And half the reason, SSI has become so prevalent just in the last year is because it's this problem of how can you verify, millions of people at hundreds of different locations, and how would that work? And with this, as I said before, with a centralized system, you can't really do that. But with decentralized and individuals actually owning their identity, it's much easier to do because then the reliance has actually moved away from the organization, which is a good thing. And they have less data, but they have less data that they probably didn't need, so it's all about this control of data and moving it back to the user. But I think as well, when we think about you said about what is an identity check and when it happens, I think with a lot of the COVID stuff, it's really all about is this person who they say they are, and do they have a vaccine? Yes or no? Do they have a negative test? Yes or no? And it's pretty straightforward, and it's usually going to be a face-to-face process. Whereas I think what Mikko was talking about with the bridging technology, it's about how can we actually use this technology to improve what we currently have. So with that bridge, we're able to replace sign in with a username and password, because instead of having to remember yet another username and another password, you could have a credential from your employer, and to log into the system, you can then scan the QR code, which again would just be a proof request, just to check I am who I say I am. It's individual, so it's entirely unique, and then use that to log onto a system. So completely remove the need for another username and password, and accounts to be set up beforehand, everything else. So that's a sort of example of one use case of the bridge. But this is a product we're building internally, and it's essentially it's any API call that we can interact with. So if you look sort of post-COVID and into the hospitality industry, which I know, Gillian, you've been doing quite a lot of work in, when you're going to check in, and there's that, that question of, have you stayed with us before? And you're like, yes, I stay here every week type thing. They don't know who they are. It's quite a big problem in hospitality. But you could have, a credential issued to you by that hotel chain that says who they are. It's got all that information for you there. It's a case of turning up, scanning that QR code, sharing the right information. The receptionist can check, yep, this is the person I'm expecting. These are the room details. And then from that, they can as well have their key be issued to them digitally by the hotel. So again, in terms of what we're saying, you know, they can then use that credential to then unlock their room door again, which is about just speeding up what's already happened. I think with COVID, me especially, I'm very, very aware of personal hygiene and, you know, touching things, you know, everywhere you go, whether it's a supermarket or wherever else, it's like, oh, I need to use hand sanitizer and everything else. This totally removes the need for that, because you could have that all sitting in your digital wallet. So it's just less interaction. So I think, yeah, with the bridge, it's really quite interesting, because the possibilities are really quite endless in terms of what you can use that to do. You know, your whole organization could become passwordless, you know, with that ability to issue credentials to each of your employees, and then that's the norm, you know, and everyone will be like, oh, why do I have to enter a password? That's so like last year type thing. So yeah. I think that's where I see it solving actual problems you get every day, and instead of just, you know, having to use password managers and all that sort of things. But I think yeah, with the API side of things, Mikko is probably best placed to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, that would be good. It's funny that you mentioned obviously like the hygiene side, and you're right. I have a young daughter, and everywhere we go, she sees hand sanitizer. She's 18 months, and she always puts her hands up because she's so used to seeing us sanitizing everywhere we go. So it's amazing how much that's become part of our lives, and actually how important it is, obviously. But again, you kind of then think about the extrapolations of when we are kind of a bit more out and about, when we are going to lots of different places, and you are kind of thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, like it will feel quite foreign. So being able to have a lot more information kind of in your own devices or on your person, for sure, I think would be really helpful. Yeah, definitely. Let's understand more about when we're talking about API calls. So basically being able to speak to kind of multiple different systems, how that would all work. And Mikko, maybe you can dive into the actual kind of technology around that, if that would be good for you.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, the Condatis approach for the bridge is utilizing existing standards. So the core of that is the OpenID Connect, which is one of the standards used in the World Wide Web today, and it's probably one of the most used ways to identify yourself online today. And a lot of the systems have that built in already. So they have the standard implementations that allow you to use OpenID Connect to identify yourselves. But at the moment, that's used by mostly for federation, for example, so that your Facebook logins or Twitter logins, that sort of things. But with the bridge that we provide, you can use that to bridge your self-sovereign identity, your mobile wallet identity, into that system by using the OpenID Connect standard. So it's a trusted standard that has a lot of adoption, which is why it's an easy way to get started with the decentralized by just using that same protocol. So there's likely no changes, no new coding required to allow yourself to start using the decentralized identity by just using this OIDC as the source of your identity data. So like going to a bit more into the technology. So it's there's two sides in this: the issuing side of things, so where you get your identity data originally. So as a company, that's probably some sort of Active Directory or CRM system where you have your data, and you can use that as a source of that data and use the bridge to issue a credential to user's wallet. So you have a record of someone on Active Directory, you can issue that information into the user's wallet, and then they can go to another company, another system, another site of your company, and use that identity in their wallet. And you can again use the bridge through the OIDC protocol to verify who they are. So as a system on that receiving end, which is the verifier, you would just use the OpenID Connect to ask for verification the usual way, the same way you would use for any federated systems. But instead, in this case, your identity information about the user would come from their wallet. So it's really an easy way to start integrating your systems and start getting those user benefits for the portability and data ownership and visibility.
Okay, so you've mentioned wallets there, and obviously, you know, we're lucky with a great partner network. So, you know, Vuorinen, Microsoft, we know that these companies obviously have wallets available today. So how does that work? Is there a specific wallet that the end user chooses, or how does that all kind of filter through?
Right. Yeah. So one of the benefits of using that, even going forwards, like using that OEDC bridge rather than implementing an SSI solution by yourself, is that we have those different technology stacks ready. So, for example, the different wallet providers, you know, Evenims Connect Me or Trinsix Wallet. There's Microsoft Authenticator app that allows you to collect those credentials as cards. Those are different technology stacks, and you need to have a different technological solution to allow users to use them. So with the bridge, that all is hidden behind the solution, so the bridging solution, and the receiving application, the solution on the company would only see the same interface, so they wouldn't need to care where that information comes from. They wouldn't even know where it comes from, which is really ideal for the user, because you don't need to worry, care what wallet they're using. You just want to get that piece of information that you need for that specific use to grant access, for example.
Okay, so again, coming back to kind of business readiness, future proofing, and all of that good stuff, that bridge really kind of supports that and makes sure that, you know, you can have a point solution, you could have multiple solutions, you could have solutions that are not necessarily the same as what your kind of tech stack is currently, and I guess it's almost like a translation layer, right? It glues everything together and makes it all work within the ecosystem. Okay, so let's again put on our future goggles. Rob, if Apple decided that they wanted to create a wallet and, you know, extend kind of what we're seeing with Apple Pay, Google Pay, these companies getting into this sort of area, how would that work with what we're talking about today?
Sure. So yeah, no, I think we'd look to integrate that, you know, within our bridge. That would be what we do. I think, like you said, we don't have our own wallet. Our sort of product vision for the bridge is to be agnostic, and essentially the main thing here is about just giving the end user the choice. You know, so if Apple do come out with, you know, store your verifiable credentials within your wallet, you're going to want to use that if you've got an iPhone. So yeah, no, absolutely, we would look to build that into our existing product. So there are you know, different ways in that decentralized can work. I think it was it webinar 4 that we talked about, you know, there's SIOP, which is the Microsoft way of doing things. There's Aries Hyperledger. There's a bunch more information on this on our other webinars, and it's definitely not stuff I can talk to. But these are, you know, protocols which are being established. There are standards behind this. So, you know, providing they build it in a sensible way, yeah, definitely we'd look to integrate that in, and then it just gives, you know, employers and end users that choice. You know, so as an employer, you don't have to mandate that all of your employees need to download this app. It's like, we're introducing the system. You need a digital wallet application. Here are the ones you can use, type thing. So yeah, again, we would just treat it as, you know, any other digital wallet and bring that in together. So it just means that from the employer perspective, it shouldn't look different. The journey shouldn't be different at all. It should be the same step every way. It's just, you know, same way that you have, you know, an American Express or a MasterCard. You know, it doesn't matter. You're still paying for it at the end of the day, right? So it's looking at how we can just make it all work, and everyone can be happy because it all work together. So yeah, that's the real sort of strategy behind where we're going with the bridge.
Okay, and I think that's, yeah, it's a really interesting point. There are really big companies, there are governments, there are cross-government departments, there are big people that are trying to solve this problem or trying to look at how this can be implemented. And the way that I view it is it's all about having your swim lane, right? And understanding, okay, let them have the big fight. Let them create the global trust networks. Let that all be taken care of at that higher level, and then make sure that you're in a position to be ready to be able to implement and to be able to support whatever decisions kind of flow down from there. But we're not asking our clients to solve everything. Quite the opposite. We're asking them to be ready to, support whatever will be coming down the line without interrupting their kind of day-to-day business, is the way that I view it, and making sure that you're getting to take advantage of, some pretty awesome technology, but you're not having to build it yourself. You're not having to create these trust frameworks. You're not having to do all that really heavy lifting. So it's really kind of, all about that user benefit, the employee benefit, and making sure that you're ready to kind of capitalize on it, is the way that I see it anyway. Okay, last question, gents. So obviously it has become apparent to me in the last few months the real endless list of use cases that could implement, that we should not, we could, we might, we may. What if you had to choose kind of a really nice, really impactful, very kind of tangible benefit use case? What would you say, Mikko, in your opinion, is one that you can really set alight today and just really make a huge impact from a business level?
Yeah, I think the one that we've been seeing just now, and it is one that brings all the benefits of that portability to existing system, is staff movement. Like, for example, staff movement across different sites or across different organizations within a bigger organization, or even staff movement abroad, or that kind of a benefit of being able to integrate different sites without having to integrate them technically. So you don't have to have a system that works with all the different sites. You can have the decentralized system where user has the kind of one source of truth. The user has the data, and each system is just using that user data in whatever system they have. So you don't need to worry about integrating the backend system, have a database that has same format of the data, but you can just use that possibility of decentralized identities and have a different kind of like access to systems, or access to the site, access to partner companies using that user-owned identity.
I think that's massive. And again, I'm sure everyone can apply that to kind of personal experience, but having relocated to America for a period of time with a previous employer, I basically got onto US soil and had no record of anything that I had done. So my mortgage, for example, the fact that I'd been a homeowner, the fact that I'd had, a car, all that good stuff, I had zero credit history, for example, in America. So therefore, it was really preventative in terms of trying to kind of establish our life over there. So the idea of having kind of that credential that could be something that would be recognized, that you can show credit history, that you can show information, you can show longevity of what you've been doing, it would have been game changing, because it was really frustrating. I think for me, one of the things that I really would love to see, I would love to see this around kind of graduates and employability, and looking at organizations where there's large numbers of graduate intake. I would love to be able to establish like how much time, energy, and fundamentally money is spent on processing graduates. Whereas if there was such a thing as, a digital transcript, a graduate credential, that whole process could be, streamlined, alleviated. And again, you could get people that are willing to get out of that university space and into employment. How much quicker could you get that? Certainly, I was thinking about it in terms of, vaccinators, using potentially something like student doctors, something along those lines, being able for them to go and help in the vaccination program would have been a great use case. Rob, what about you? What do you think?
Thanks. Yeah, I think staff movement today is a real problem we can solve, and we have solved. We've had a project running for over a year with the NHS, which is to look at doctors moving around different hospitals specifically for COVID. With the with the Nightingale's Hospital, these sort of, and the Louisa Jordan, these super hospitals that have been essentially spun up to deal with the COVID patients. How can the staff there verify that, you know, someone turns up in full PPE with the face mask and everything else on? Are they actually a doctor? Are they a nurse? Are they say who they are? So that's the problem we've ran there. And again, that really works well, is because you've got the NHS, which is, you know, massive, biggest employer in the UK, and it's about, within the NHS, within NHS England, there's over 300 different organizations. So it's not one organization where everyone does everything the same way. So with decentralized identity, they've been able to use, you know, one of our partner apps, Evernham, download their app and then be issued their digital credential, which means they can go from, you know, Manchester to Birmingham and turn up at the hospital, have their identity verified and checked, and then start working on the ward. So that's sort of a real life use case we've actually implemented. We're also working within the nuclear industry to look again there. You know, that there's a number of different nuclear sites across the UK, and how can someone go from one site to the other? With the nuclear sites, there's always security clearance, so it's always verifying that they've got that. And then we've also started to look into, you know, radiation dosage levels, because if you're exposed at one site, then other site needs to know that, because they have limits and health and safety regulations. So you can't come away, you know, glowing, and because someone didn't know that you've actually already been exposed to your limit for that month. So that's the real sort of today problems that I'm looking at. But I think I'm with you, Gillian, in terms of where it's going next, and this idea of these, you know, these lifetime credentials of, you graduate from university or from college and you have this digital transcript, which then you can use to, you know, apply to jobs. You can share it with your new employer to confirm like what you've got, because I don't know about anyone else. I don't know where my university certificate is. It's
No.
in a drawer somewhere. Pretty sure I don't have a digital version of it at all. But that's just another way, and that can help that process. And it means I can easily share that, as opposed to having to dig it out and scan it and send it and all that stuff. And then beyond that as well, you know, once you've started a new place, you've got a staff credential, you can then, that can include all your employment details as well, which you have. Thinking about when you would need to use that, you know, I know, Gillian, me and you are both going through mortgage applications at the moment.
Separately, may I add, but yes, we are.
Separately, we are, yeah. But the amount of forms and the amount of information they need, you know, personally from my workplace, it takes hours to fill out all these forms. And there was a lot of duplication. So there's processes like that where I'm like, this is so hard and so difficult to do, and it's all information that, you know, I need to check other emails and go through my drawers to find it. Whereas if I had it all in one place that I was in control of, it'd be easy to just share it that way. So I think, yeah, this whole idea of being given a credential and be able to use it at multiple places throughout your lifetime is where the real benefit will be. And, you know, my big thing is to eliminate passwords. I think this is a really good way to eliminate passwords as well. You know, I think looking at my password manager, I have, you know, 250 plus passwords, which and then all of that is secured by, you know, the master key password. And I know there are checks and balances in place to recover that if I need to, but being able to just tie my account to, you know, credentials and log in that way feels a lot more secure and a lot easier as well. So yeah, that's sort of my view, and that's where I want this technology to go, and for it to be adopted that way.
And it's massive if you think about that from a security point of view, not only necessarily online, but physical security, as you say, accessing sites. Again, just from personal experience, accessing nursery, making sure that I am who I say I am when I'm going to pick up my daughter, all of that stuff. Like, it's so important. And, you know, I'd love to see a lot of this actually kind of filter down throughout society, because I think it genuinely could disrupt for the better. So I think it's massive. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. In terms of things that kind of are tangible and actionable now, what we're seeing, and again, feel free to correct me, is that the bridge, the OIDC bridge that we've talked about before, that's pretty much good to go. So if I am a business and I'm looking to get myself in a position of readiness going forward, that's probably a really good way to start. So again, it's adding in a layer of kind of ability to pivot depending on what comes down the line. Is that probably an accurate way to describe that, Mikko?
Yeah, definitely. So from the perspective of the organization that would use it, it's just another identity provider through the OpenID Connect standard. So you can just plug it in and start using it.
Okay, perfect. And then in terms of, we spoke a little bit about our partners and some of the kind of use cases that we have in place just now. I think kind of what we're saying is that we can really work with companies to establish what is going to be the most impactful, how this is going to work for them, and actually how we can kind of support going forward. And whether that be with a total solution, a partial solution, a solution to get you ready for the future. I think what we're really willing and open to doing is to understanding what that looks like and how we can support companies going forward to make sure that, as I say, the end user gets this great user experience, whether it be passwordless in the future, like you're talking about, Rob. I'm really excited for the journey. I just want to say thank you so much to the attendees. Thank you very much to anybody watching this on demand, and thank you so much to Mikko and Rob for your being so generous with your thoughts and where you think that this potentially could go. And I would ask, if possible, if people would be willing to kind of give us a little bit of feedback. We are always wanting to improve. We're always wanting to make sure that our content is as relevant as it can be for future webinars. So please feel free to use the QR code and submit some feedback. We would really, really appreciate it. And all that's left to say is thank you so much. And if there's any further information, please feel free to drop us a line on the website, and we'd be more than happy to set up some discussions. Thanks all. See you later.